this computer. That's what we want. Great. All right, lovely. Welcome everybody to the Spiritual Events Directory author series. This group of interviews is going to be with authors who are going to share their journey, their inspiration, their reason for writing, and we're going to talk about their stories basically, so that you can understand why they might have gone down the crazy road of publishing a book, which I understand because I have done that journey myself. And so today we're going to speak to Rhonda Valentine Dixon. Welcome. How are you today?
I'm really well, thank you.
That's great. And where are you coming to us from?
I live in the northern suburbs of Brisbane.
Ah, great. Yes. So you're up in Brisbane, and a lot of the people that we're going to be talking to in this series are from Queensland, because that's where our publisher lives. So, but I'm coming to you from Phillip Island, and some of you on this network know me. So we're going to be talking today. My name's Pip Coleman, and we're going to be having a chat today about Rhonda's books and her passion for writing not just her own story and her own history, but also other people's stories and history as well. So perhaps, Rhonda, you might like to start with telling us why it is that you like to write.
Well, I've loved writing. And many people all say that they've loved writing since they were a child, and I'm one of those people. And but it wasn't until I had children with disabilities that I got serious about writing, because I realised that I could help others with the written word. And the first two books I co-wrote were to help families living with autism.
Yes.
And then we've my co-writer of those books, she and I are doing another one for teenagers at the moment. So but why? Just, it's a passion. Words, I realized when I was very young, the first year of school, that I loved words, and it hasn't stopped for me. In early childhood, I wrote letters to anyone that would answer.
You had lots of pen pals, did you?
Yes.
Yes. That's great.
And that was a way of expressing myself safely.
Yep. Fantastic. I think that's, for me, that was the same sort of thing. I had that experience of being much more passionate about writing than I did about maths and other subjects at school. Definitely. And my grandparents were very encouraging of writing, because they loved to write and they loved to read. And so it was a big thing, a bit of a connection thing for us as well, that I actually had the same sort of passion for writing. And
it's really interesting that you should say that, because one of my passions is obviously writing the stories of others. And because life is changing so dramatically, particularly in the last century and this century, many things get forgotten. So to write people's stories is so important.
Yes.
I've got a letter that was written by my twice great grandmother to my grandfather, which told me so much more about her than any family anecdote did.
Oh yes, absolutely.
So vitally important to so that we know where we come from, because we're not just a product of our parents, we're a product of what came before.
Absolutely.
Very obvious in my family.
Yeah, fantastic. And the thing that's interesting to me is, you know, that those writings, like you say, letters, diaries, information that's coming directly from the person at that time, not a reflective writing is great too. I mean, my grandfather's books are very, you know, helpful to understand his thought process, but it's reflecting on the time, whereas reading his journals and his diaries gives a whole different perspective on
How
that.
valuable for you to have that resource.
Mm.
That is wonderful.
Mm. So that's fantastic. And your writing obviously has evolved over the years in terms of, you know, as a child, obviously it's going to be different to how you write now.
Yes.
How would you say that it's evolved over the years?
When I was a child, there were letters and also poetry.
Right.
And I had a dear friend who I thought was a cousin, but I found later that she wasn't. But she always said, when we got separated because of circumstances, she said, "Don't ever stop sending your poetry to me." So I did do that, and then I didn't see her for over 50 years.
Oh,
And when
wow.
I did go back home to New Zealand and catch up with her in 2017, she came out of her bedroom with an envelope that was full of all those poems. So
Oh.
many of them had been lost because my parents also emigrated to Australia sometime after I did. So, yeah, and then after poetry, really, I just got on with life, traveled the world as you do, and didn't do a lot of writing until I needed to. But then when, something important happened in my life, and I went back to the written word, and now I really want to write people's stories. And
Yeah, yeah. So what was the I mean, you said something important happened and you went back to the writing again. Are you able to share what that was, that shift that happened for you?
it was a betrayal of a friend. So it was no, it's terribly upsetting.
Sure. No, that's okay. I mean, everybody's had these experiences, and it's, you know, it's something that everybody can relate to, you know, having that happen. And everybody finds their way of dealing with those sorts of big events that happen in our life, whether it's,
Yes.
you know, a trauma or an illness or, you know, a relationship breaking down. We've all experienced that. And I think that's what inspires a lot of writers and singers and poets and
Yes.
creatives, you know, to draw to draw from their own experiences. It's compelling for people to read, you know. So that's amazing. And then your children have obviously encouraged you to write because of the autism issues that particularly one of your children has. So what's the the most kind of, what is it about that made you want to write about it?
Because I could see other families going through the same trauma that we were, and I wanted their stress to be alleviated. And what me and my colleagues and friends had done that was helpful for our children, we wanted to impart that knowledge. We also wanted to help teachers and other professionals. Because we had things like GPs saying to us, "There's nothing you can do about it. Go home and look after your other kids." And I mean, we had terrible things said to us as young mothers. There's nothing that you can do for him. Bring him back in when he's 30 months. It was one thing that was said to me when the child was head banging. I was told, "Well, he's got a hard skull, don't worry about it."
Just not understanding. Yeah. So that's amazing. So the book, what's the name of the book that or the books that relate to that, so people can
One of them's out of print because we wrote it to help parents get their child into a Queensland school.
Okay.
And the system in Queensland changed. The ascertainment for getting your child into school changed. So that's now out of print. It sold out and we didn't reprint. But the other one, I've got it here.
Great.
How to Stop Your Words from Bumping into Someone Else's. And
Fantastic.
the reason I called it that was because Lindley didn't understand what interrupting was, but he needed something tangible. So bumping into someone with his words was what, and he still comes out with that phrase today when his words are bumping into mine. So
yeah,
he'll
and
apologise for his words bumping in.
And this is, he's 29 now, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So, that's fantastic that you've been able to give him a resource, and yourself and other parents,
Yes.
that's fantastic. So
Yes.
is there, there's obviously new things that you're writing all the time because you love to write.
Yep.
So what is your latest project that's coming up for you?
Well, one is with my co-author on autism, and that's the same sort of thing that How to Stop Your Words from Bumping into Someone Else's is.
Yep.
It's a teaching effective communication in schools for autistic teenagers, because How to Stop was being used in high schools and it was written for primary schools. I mean, I'm absolutely rapt that they were finding it useful in high schools as well.
Right.
But so now we with the next one, it will be far more helpful to the older students. And another major project that I've got on the go is the story of two ladies who are now in their 70s who were orphans in Melbourne. Well, actually, they weren't orphans. Both their parents were still alive, but they were in an orphanage in Melbourne in the 1950s.
Okay.
So that's a major project because it's got to be dealt with delicately.
Sure. Yeah. So that's two very different, angles that you're approaching at the moment.
I think it demonstrates my strong sense of social justice for a start.
Sure, definitely. I mean, you're really focusing on two very important issues. That the way that we treat our wise ones in the community, our sages of the community, and the way that we look after the people who are our newest and very important. The autistic children, so interesting. I've read some amazing articles and books about autism, and from a spiritual perspective, how these children, these people are coming into these souls are coming into the world to raise our vibration, because they're very intuitive and they're coming from that very kinesthetic, feeling place rather than the thinking mind place. They come from a very different space in terms of,
yes.
Their intention, the reason why they're here is to help us to be more intuitive, to help us to be more kinesthetic, to feel our way through life rather than being so egoic and coming from the mind, which I love that people are writing about it. I love that people are speaking more about it, because this is something that we need to embrace in the society.
Yes, we've got, when Lindley was diagnosed, there were 1 in 10,000 children being diagnosed autistic. Now it's 1 in 63 or something like that.
Yeah, so that it's a shift. Our whole society is changing. We have a whole new way of being. And then with everything going on at the moment with the pandemic, it's changing the way that we do things,
It is.
It's shifting and transforming and resetting of the earth, So it's really important, and it's fantastic that you're writing about it. So what was the impetus behind the stories of the two ladies? Obviously you love to write the stories of other people.
Yes.
So how did you discover that this story needed to be written?
One of them, who lives locally now, everything that she did, if she made a mistake, she'd apologize, because in the orphanage they weren't taught this, that or the other. And I said to her, you really need to write your story. It's one that needs to be told.
Yeah.
And she said, I can't. And I said, why? And she said, I can't write.
Oh.
She was illiterate because the nutrition was so poor. She couldn't develop, her brain couldn't develop as a child who lived in a home with good nutrition could develop.
Sure.
And not only that, but the fear of being wrapped across the knuckles with the sharp side of a ruler in the classroom because she was left-handed. Prevented her from learning as well.
Yeah.
She lived in a state of anxiety and fear the entire time she was in the orphanage. They both did.
Yeah.
And so.
Yeah. So did they know each other in the orphanage, or are they just happened to be in the same?
They're sisters.
Oh, they are sisters. Okay.
Yes. Yes.
Right.
So one was 5 and one was 4 when they were put into the orphanage.
Okay, great. And where are you at with with that particular project? Is it at manuscript stage, or is it still in the research phase?
It's half and half. There's still some more research to do because one of the sisters still lives in Victoria. So, and it's a topic it's a delicate topic. And being in her 70s, she has a husband that is not well. So I've got to be mindful of asking difficult questions at a time that she's comfortable with. So some of it's almost ready to go to the beta readers, but some of it isn't. So
okay, fantastic. So is that the project that's Ocean is working with you on, or is it the children's book that Ocean's working with you on?
Ocean published a children's book for me, which was quite delightful. I'd never set out to be a children's author. I knew how difficult it was to be a children's author. You've got to think of every single word that you write. Every word needs to have significance. So, but when I was at Tai Chi, and at the time Elska was 95, she lost a cane that we use, canes and swords in Tai Chi. She lost hers and asked if I could help her find it. And when she said to me, I feel like confessing to my mother that I've lost this because I've had it for over 50 years. I thought that was delightful. And I thought, how can I translate that into a story for children?
Right.
Well, that was the only bit of the story that I had to leave out because how could you say that a 95-year-old lady has a 120-year-old mother at home? So that part I left out, but the rest of the story is true.
You think that would have been a bit too a bit too unbelievable for people that
difficult
she was
to translate. Yeah. But,
that's great.
And she's 99 next month and still doing Tai Chi every week. So she feels rather like a rock star because this book's been written about her and people keep asking her to buy it. So it's wonderful.
Oh, what a lovely thing. And that must be, so fulfilling and,
it is.
incredible.
I get an enormous sense of joy out of seeing her face when people respond. And people respond to her in writing, and she always brings me a copy of what they've said too. It's lovely.
Bless her. That's so sweet. And, it's really great. So you're thinking that you might do some more of those sorts of stories, those sorts of books?
I have written another one, but it's just been rejected by Wombat. It's wonderful to get rejection. You feel like a real writer.
It's like, I'm a real writer. I'm getting rejected.
Yeah. So I will look at other avenues for that one. It's a very intrinsically New Zealand story, so I may look at New Zealand publishers for that one.
Okay.
So that's children, but I don't necessarily want to continue to write children's books. It's just that these two happened, and they happened.
That's just how it happened.
Yes.
That's great. So it's what do you feel like? Do you just go with your gut on the projects that kind of show themselves to you?
Absolutely.
Or you do?
Absolutely. Yeah. And family history. I've written a lot of my family history stories, but in a veiled way because some of them are very distressing. So instead of using real names, I've put them into short stories.
Right. Yeah. I think that was for me, that was one of the things with my book that I needed to do, was change people's names, just so that it could be any cruise ship at any time, for, you know, and people could have that sort of plausible deniability if they wanted to say, oh, I don't know any of those people in those stories.
Exactly.
Or they could say, they could claim it and say, oh, I know which character I am, and they could claim it if they wanted to. So
Yes.
I feel like that's a nice way of giving people the choice of what,
and
how
it
they
also,
respond.
when it comes to the one I'm writing about, the two girls, it also, how could I didn't feel I had a right to expose to the descendants of abusers that their loved one was an abuser. So I changed all the names in that, except for the two 14-year-old heroes, and except for the name of the institution. I even changed the names of my sisters, because well, one of the sons of one of my sisters came to me and asked that I limit what I wrote, so I had to be very careful.
Right, yeah. And there's that honouring of people as well that, you know, needs to happen when you're writing their stories. So
Yes.
I think that is nice to be able to do that, as long as it doesn't completely hinder the way that you express the story, because it is, you know, especially if you're telling your own story, it's your story from your point of view, and if you censor it, that can sometimes actually not give the full impact of the story, you know.
Absolutely.
So
and so I say to people, if they want to write, I sometimes speak to the elderly and say, write. You don't necessarily have to publish it, but if loved ones find what you've written when you're gone, it can be so helpful to them, because that letter of my twice great grandmother, I had asked my grandfather when I was 15, what was your father like? I said to him, and he said, we don't talk about him, he was a rogue. And what I later found when I was doing family history was that my great-grandfather wasn't a rogue. He just obviously fell out of love with my great-grandmother and moved to another part of New Zealand and started another relationship. But he then, and so this letter from my grandfather's grandmother was basically saying, it was a veiled way of saying, your father's not a bad man, you know. And so, yeah, that was very, very telling to find that letter.
Yes, and it reframes the situation.
It does.
To heal the family, doesn't it? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that whole process of the genealogy, and, you know, my sister is really into sort of doing all of the genealogy research, and it's so interesting to hear her stories of, you know, this person's gone here and this person's changed their name and this person said they were married but they weren't, or, you know, the other way around, you know.
Even
so
in a country as small as New Zealand, people married in Otago, and when that relationship fell apart, they went to Auckland and married again. You know, and it's incredible.
It's fascinating, that whole, you know, people's stories are the things that make up our lives, you know.
Well, we're the only species on Earth that remembers and tells stories from the memories.
That's true. There's no other species that actually writes things down or records things in that way that we know of anyway. I mean, we know that, you know, certain
elephants
animals
have good memories.
Certain animals have good memories, or they, you know, the turtles always come back to the same place to lay their eggs, and you know, there's a lot of that sort of thing in terms of memory or instinct. I'm not quite sure whether that's a similar thing, but there certainly isn't that recording of the history of that, not in that practical sense, in that tangible sense, but perhaps there is in their DNA. Perhaps they do remember. That's an interesting.
I'm sure. Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
That's an interesting thing. I mean, why would they go back to the same place without
To lay their eggs? That's right. Yeah.
you know,
I
so
agree.
it's an interesting concept to consider. But
You bring
that's
up
fantastic.
DNA there too, and an interesting thing about DNA is that when trauma occurs, that can change a person's DNA, and it can be passed down through the generations. And I've seen that in my own family, where my great-grandfather was, I think, my perception, not my my grandfather on my mother's side, my perception of him was that he was a gentle soul when he went off to World War One. And he came back to New Zealand with PTSD or shell shock, and was in an institution, a mental institution, for many years. That he didn't start having children until after he came back from the war. So his children were affected by that trauma, and so was our generation, my generation.
Right.
So
yeah, absolutely.
That's why it's important to tell stories, so that we understand, so that we can deal with issues. I see families where issues aren't dealt with, where truth isn't, where hiding things is easier than truth, but truth in the long run is easier, I think.
Yes, it's much harder to hide hide a secret than it is to deal with the truth that comes out. You know, it's such an interesting thing, and it's a very it's a topical thing. It's important that everybody knows that they can talk about what they need to talk about, and that they're allowed to as well. But then we also need the skills to deal with the emotions that come up when we do share those truths. And
indeed, I think communication should be taught in schools.
Definitely. Yeah, that would have been really helpful for a lot of people. It's definitely something. And now with the concerns around mental health and that sort of thing, and that are coming out of the pandemic situation, it's even more important to communicate and to connect with each other in whatever way that we can, so that we don't fall into that isolation.
I think some very interesting stories will come out of this time of COVID.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely. It's been a pleasure talking to you, Rhonda. Thank you so much for joining me. Where can we find you? Where can people find you? Because you've got some lovely books, lots of different things there.
I'm at www.rhondavalentinedixon.com.au.
Great.
And thank you so much for having me.
You're on Facebook as well,
yes, I am. Yes. I have.
That's Rhonda Valentine Dixon as well, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Yes.
Yep.
And I have an author page as well.
Fantastic. So when we see this video on the Spiritual Events Directory, you'll be able to click on the links, everybody. I'll put the links of those websites on there so that you can check out Rhonda's great work and follow her more of her journey as we go forward. But thank you again for joining me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been lovely talking to you.
Thanks again, and we'll see you for the next author series interview very soon.
Okay.
Bye for now.
Bye.